He looks up at them disinterested and maybe disgusted by the baby because he wanders deep into the recesses of the cluttered store to get away. The shop has things from perhaps every point in American history. A display of iPods and other little gadgets from his grandfather's time cover an old chrome-rimmed dinner table. An old movie plays on an antique plasma screen TV. The movie shows a crazy vision of a future that never came with flying cars and white-haired scientists. Can I help you? An old woman as hunched as a question mark comes out from behind the cash register. She walks with a cane, but she seems pretty sure-footed in spite of it. Riza bounced the baby to get its volume down. We're looking for Sonia. You found her. What do you want? We need some help, Risa says. Yeah, Connor chimes in. Someone told us to come here. The old woman looks at them suspiciously. Does this have something to do with that fiasco over at the high school? Are you clappers? Do we look like clappers to you? Says Connor. The woman narrows her eyes at him. Nobody looks like a clapper. Connor narrows his gaze to match hers, then goes over to the wall. He holds up his hand and jabs it forward with all his might, punching the wall hard enough to bruise his knuckles. A little paint of a fruit bowl falls off the wall. Connor catches it before it hits the ground, and sets it on the counter. See, he says, my blood isn't explosive. If I was a clapper, this whole shop would be gone. The old woman stares at him, and it's a hard gaze for Connor to hold. There's some sort of fire in those weary eyes, but Connor doesn't look away. See this hunch, she says? I got it from sticking my neck out for people like you. Connor still won't break his gaze. Guess we came to the wrong place then, glancing at Riza. He says, let's get out of here. He turns to leave, and the old woman swings her cane sharply and painfully across his shins. Not so fast. It just so happens that Hannah called me, so I knew you were coming. Riza, still bouncing the baby, let out a frustrated breath. You could have told us when we came in. What fun would that be? But now the sour-faced customer had made his way closer again, picking up item after item, his expression showing instant disapproval of everything in the shop. I have some lovely infant items in the back room, she tells that loud enough for the customer to hear. Why don't you go back there and wait for me? Then she whispers, and for God's sake, feed that baby. The back room is through a doorway covered by what looks like an old shower curtain. If the front room was cluttered, this place is a disaster area. Things like broken picture frames and rusty bird cages are piled all around, all the items that weren't good enough to be displayed out front, the junk of the junk. And you're telling me this old woman is going to help us, says Connor? It looks like she can't even help herself. Hannah said she would. I believe her. How could you be raised in a stay-at-home and still trust people? Riza gives him a dirty look and says, hold this. She puts the baby in Connor's arms. It's the first time she's given it to him. It feels much lighter than he expected. Something so loud and demanding ought to be heavier. The baby's cries have weakened now, and it's just about exhausted itself. There's nothing keeping them tied to this baby anymore. They could stork it again first thing in the morning, and yet the thought makes Connor uncomfortable. They don't owe this baby anything. It's theirs by stupidity, not biology. He doesn't want it, but he can't stand the thought of someone getting the baby who wants it even less than he does. His frustration begins to ferment into anger. It's the kind of anger that always got him in trouble back home. It would cloud his judgment, making him lash out, getting into fights, cursing out teachers, or riding his skateboard wildly through busy intersections. Why do you have to get wound so tight? His father once asked, aspirated, and Connor had snapped back. Maybe someone ought to unwind me. At the time, he thought he was just being funny. Riza opens a refrigerator, which is cluttered as the rest of the back room. She pulls out a container of milk, then finds a bowl which she pours the milk. It's not a cat, Connor says. It won't lick milk out of the bowl. I know what I'm doing. Connor watches as she rummages around the drawers until she finds a clean spoon. Then she takes the baby from him. Sitting down, she cradles the baby a bit more skillfully than Connor. Then she dips the spoon into the milk and spills the spoon into the baby's mouth. The baby begins to gag on the milk, coughing and sputtering, but then Riza puts her index finger on its mouth. It sucks on her finger and closes its eyes, satisfied. In a few moments, she crooks her fingers enough to leave a little space for her to spill and another spoonful of tea. When that lets baby suck on the finger again. Wow, that's impressive, says Connor. Sometimes I gotta take care of babies at Staho. You learn a few tricks. Let's just hope it's not lactose intolerant. But the baby quieted as if all the day's tension has been suddenly released. Connor's eyelids grow heavy, but yet he won't allow himself to fall asleep. They're not safe yet. They may never be, and he can't let his guard down now. Still, his mind begins to drift off. He wonders if his parents are looking for him, or if it's just the police now. He thinks about Ariana. What would happen to them if she had come along with them as she had promised? They would have been caught on that first night. That's what would have happened. Ariana wasn't street smart like Riza. She wasn't resourceful. Thoughts of Ariana bring a wave of sadness and longing, but it's not as powerful as a feeling as Connor thought it would be. How soon until she forgets him? How soon until everyone forgets him? Not long. That's what happens with Unwinds. Connor had known other kids at school who disappeared over the last couple of years. One day they just didn't turn up. Teachers would say they were gone or no longer enrolled. Those were just code words, though. Everyone knew what that meant. The kids who knew them would talk about how terrible it was and gripe about it for a day or two, and then it became old news. Unwinds didn't go out with a bang. They didn't even go out with a whimper. They went out with silence of a candle flame pinched between two fingers. The customer finally leaves, and Sona joins them in the back room. So you're unwinds and you want my help? Is that it? Maybe just some food, says Connor. A place to rest for a few hours, then we'll be on our way. We don't want to be any trouble, says Risa. The old woman laughs at that. Yes, you do. You want to be trouble to everyone you meet. She points her cane at Risa. That's what you are now, trouble in caps lock. Then she puts her cane down and softens a bit. It's not your fault, though. You didn't ask to be born, and you didn't ask to be unwound either. She looks back and forth between the two of them, then says to Risa, just as bald-faced as can be, if you really want to stay alive, honey, have him get you pregnant again. They won't unwind an expectant mother, so that will buy you 9 whole months. Risa drops her jaw, speechless, and Connor feels a flush come to his face. She wasn't pregnant the first time. It's not her baby or mine. Sonia considers this and takes a closer look at the baby. Not yours. Well, that explains why you're not breastfeeding. She laughs suddenly and sharply. It makes Connor and the baby jump. Riza isn't startled, just annoyed. She gets the baby's attention again with another spoonful of milk in her index finger. Are you going to help us or not? Sonia lifts her cane and wraps it against Connor's arm, then points to a large trunk covered with travel stickers. Think you're birth enough to bring that over here? Connor gets up, wondering what could possibly be of use to them in the trunk. He grabs on it and struggles to push it across the faded Persian rug. Not much of birth, are you? I never said I was. He inches the truck across the floor until it's right in front of her. Instead of opening it, she sits on top of it and begins to massage her ankles. So what's in it? Connor asks. Correspondence, she says, but it's not what's in it that matters, it's what's underneath. Then, with her cane, she pushes away the rug where the trunk had been to reveal a trapdoor with a brass pull ring. Go on, says Sonia, putting again with her cane. Connor sighs and grabs the ring, pulls open the trapdoor to reveal steep stone steps leading into the darkness. Riza puts down her bowl and holds the baby over her shoulder in a burping position, approaches the trapdoor, kneeling beside Connor. This is an old building, Sonia tells them. Way back in the early 20th century, during the first prohibition, they hid hooch down here. Hooch? Asked Connor. Alcohol. I swear this whole generation's the same. Caps lock, ignorant. The steps down are steep and uneven. At first, Connor thinks Sonia will lead them down alone, but she insists on leading the way. She takes her time and seems more sure-footed on the steps than she does on level ground. Connor tries to hold her arm to give her support, but she shakes him off and throws him a nasty gaze. If I want your help, I'll ask. Do I look feeble to you? Actually, yes. Looks deceiving, she says. After all, when I saw you, I thought you looked reasonably intelligent. Very funny. At the bottom, Sonia reaches towards the wall and throws a light switch. Risa gasps, and Connor follows her gaze until he sees them. 3 figures, a girl and 2 boys. Your little family has just grown. Sonia tells them. The kids don't move. They appear to be closer to Connor and Reese's age. Fellow unwinds for sure. They look weary and exhausted. Connor wonders if he looks as bad. For God's sake, stop staring, she says to them. You look like a pack of rats. Sonia shuffles around the dusty cellar, pointing things out to Risa and Connor. These are canned goods on the shelves, and a can opener around somewhere. Eat wherever you want, but don't leave anything over or you'll really see rats. Bathrooms back here, keep it clean. I'll go out in a bit and get some formula and a baby bottle. She glances at Connor. Oh, and there's a first aid kit around here somewhere for that bite on your arm, whatever that's all about. Connor suppresses a grin. Sonia didn't miss a thing. How much longer? Asked the oldest of the three cellar rats. A muscular guy looks at Connor with some intense distrust as if Connor might challenge his role as alpha male or something. What do you care, says Sonia. You got a pressing appointment? The kid doesn't respond. He just glares at Sonia and crosses his arms, displaying a shark tattooed on his forearm. Ooh, thinks Connor with a smirk. Intimidating. Now I'm really scared. Sonia sighs. 4 more days until I'm rid of you for good. What happens in 4 days? Risa asks. The ice cream man comes, and with that, Sonia climbs up the stairs faster than Connor thought she'd be able to. The trapdoor bangs closed. Dear sweet dragon lady won't tell us what happens next. The second boy, a lanky blonde kid with a faint smirk, seems permanently fixed on his face. He has braces on his teeth that don't appear to need them. Although his eyes tell of sleepless nights, his hair is perfect. Connor can tell that this kid, despite the rags he's wearing, comes from money. We get sent to a harvest camp and they cut us apart. That's what happens next, says the girl. She's Asian and looks almost as tough as the kid with the tattoo with the hair dyed, a deep shade of pink and spiked leather choker on her neck. Shark Boy looks at her sharply. Would you show up with your end of the world crap? Connor notices that the kid has 4 parallel scratch marks on one side of his face, consistent with fingernails. The girl has a black eye. It's not the end of the world, she grumbles, just the end of us. You're beautiful when you're nihilistic, says the smirker. Shut up. You're only saying that because you don't know what nihilistic means. Risa gives Connor a look and knows what she's thinking. We have to suffer through 4 days with this crew. Still, she's the first to hold out her hand to them and introduce herself. Reluctantly, Connor does the same. Turns out each of these kids, just like every Unwind, has a story that ranks a 10 on the Kleenex scale. The smirker is Hayden. As Connor predicted, he comes from a ridiculously wealthy family. When his parents got a divorce, there was a brutal custody battle over him. 2 years and 6 court dates later, it still wasn't resolved. In the end, the only thing his mother and father could agree on was that each would rather see Hayden unwound than allow the other parent to have custody. If you could harness the energy of my parents' spite, Hayden tells them, you could power a small city for several years. Oh my god. The girl is her parents kept trying for a boy until they finally got one, but not before having 4 girls first. My was the 4th. It's nothing new, Mai tells them. Back in China in the days when only one kid was allowed per family, people were killed off, their baby girls left and right. The big kid is Roland. He had dreams of being a military birth, but apparently had too much testosterone or steroids, or a combination of both, leaving him a little too scary even for the military. Like Connor, Roland got into fights at school, although Connor suspected Roland's fights were much, much worse. That's not what did him in, though. Roland had beaten up his stepfather for beating his mom. The mother took her husband's side, and the stepfather got off with a warning. Roland, on the other hand, was sent to be unwound. Damn. That's so unfair, Risa tells him. Like, what happens to you is any fair, says Connor. Roland fixes his gaze on Connor. It's emotional stone. You keep talking to her in that tone of voice, maybe she'll find herself a new boyfriend. Connor smiles with a mocking warmth at him and glances at the tattoo on his wrist. I like your dolphin. Roland's not amused. It's a tiger shark, idiot. Connor makes a mental note never to turn his back on Roland. Sharks, Connor once read, have a deadly form of claustrophobia. It's not so much a fear of enclosed spaces as it is an inability to exist in them. though no one knows why. Some say it's the metal in the aquariums that throws off their equilibrium. But whatever it is, big sharks don't last long in captivity. After a day in Sonia's basement, Connor knows how they feel. Risa has the baby to keep her occupied. It requires a huge amount of attention. Although she gripes about responsibility, Connor can tell she's thankful simply to have something to pass the hours. There's a back room to the basement, and Roland insists that Risa have it for herself and the baby. He acts like he's doing it to be kind, but it's obvious he's doing it because he can't stand the baby's crying. Mai reads. There's a whole collection of dusty old books in the corner, and Mai always has one in her hand. Roland, having surrendered the back room to Risa, pulls out a shelving unit and sets up his own private residence behind it. He occupies the space like he's had experience with being in a cell. When he's not sitting in his little cell, he's reorganizing the food in the basement into rations. I take care of the food, he announces. Now that there's 4 of us, I'll redivide the rations and decide who gets what and when. I can decide what I want and when for myself, Connor tells him. Not gonna work that way, Roland says. I had things under control before you got here. It's gonna stay that way. Then he hands Connor a can of Spam. Connor looks at it in disgust. You want better, Roland says? Then you get with the program. Connor tries to weigh the wisdom of getting into a fight over this, but wisdom rarely arrives when Connor is ticked off. It's Hayden who defuses the situation before it can escalate. Hayden grabs the can from Connor and pulls open the top. You snooze, you lose, he says, and begins eating the Spam casually with his fingers. Never had Spam till I came here. Now I love it. God help me, I'm turning into trailer trash. Roland glares at Connor, and Connor glares back. Then he says that he always says at moments like this, nice socks. Although Roland doesn't look down right away, it derails him just enough for him to back off. He doesn't check to see if his socks match until he thinks Connor isn't looking. And the moment he does, Connor snickers. Small victories are better than none. Hayden is a bit of a riddle. Connor's not sure whether he's actually amused by everything that goes on around him or if it's all just an act, a way of defending himself against a situation too painful to allow himself to feel. Usually Connor disliked rich, affected kids like Hayden, but there's something about Hayden that simply makes it impossible not to like him. Connor sits next to Hayden, who glances to make sure that Roland has gone behind the shelving unit. I like the nice socks maneuver, says Hayden. Mind if I use that sometime? Be my guest. Hayden pulls off a piece of Spam and offers it to Connor. Although it's the last thing Connor wants right now, he takes it because he knows it's not about the meat, just as he knows Hayden didn't take it because he wanted it. The chunk of processed ham passes from Hayden to Connor, and something between them relaxes. An understanding is reached. I'm on your side, that piece of Spam says. I've got your back. Did you mean to have the baby? Hayden says. Connor considers how he might answer. He figures the truth is the best way to begin every tentative friendship. It's not mine. Hayden nods. It's cool that you're hanging out with her even though the kid's not yours. It's not hers either. Hayden smirks. He doesn't ask how the baby came into their possession because apparently the version he's come up in his mind is far more entertaining than anything Connor can offer. Don't tell Roland, he says. The only reason he's being so nice to the two of you is because he believes the sanctity of the nuclear family. Connor can't tell whether Hayden's being serious or sarcastic. He suspects he'll never figure that out. Hayden chows down the last of the Spam, looks into the empty can and sighs. My life as a Morlock, he says. Am I supposed to know what that is? Light-sensitive underground frogmen often portrayed in bad green rubber costumes. Sadly, this is what we become, except for the green rubber costume part. Connor glances at the food shelves. When he listens closely, he can hear the teeny beat of music coming from the antique MP3 player Roland must have stolen from upstairs when he first arrived. How long have you known Roland? 3 days longer than you, Hayden says. We're to the unwise, which I suspect you are. Roland is fine as long as he thinks he's in charge. As long as you let him think that, we're all one big happy family. What if I don't want him to think that? Hayden tosses his can of Spam into the trash a few feet away. The thing about Morlocks is that they're known to be cannibals. Connor can't sleep that first night. Between the discomfort of the basement and his distrust of Roland, all he can do is doze for a moment at a time. He won't sleep in the side room with Riza because the space is small and he and Riza would have to sleep right up against each other. He tells himself the real reason is he's afraid of rolling over on the baby during the night. Maya and Hayden are also awake. It looks like Maya's trying to sleep, but her eyes are open, her mind is somewhere else. Hayden has lit a candle he found in the debris, making the basement smell like sediment over mildew. Hayden, Hayden passes his hand back and forth over the flame. He doesn't move slowly enough to burn himself, but he does move slowly enough to feel the heat. Hayden notices Connor watching him. It's funny how a flame can only burn your hand if you move too slow. Hayden says, "You can tease it all you want, and it never gets you if you're quick enough." "Are you pyro?" Connor asks. "You're confusing boredom with obsession." Connor consents, however, there's more to it. "I've been thinking about kids that get unwound," says Hayden. "Why would you want to do that?" says Connor. "Because," says my from across the room. He's a freak. "I'm not the one wearing a dog collar." My flips Hayden the finger, which he ignores. "I've been thinking about how harvest camps are like black holes. Nobody knows what goes on inside." "Everybody knows what goes on," says Connor. "No," says Hayden. "Everybody knows the result, but nobody knows how unwinding works. I want to know how it happens. Does it happen right away, or do they keep you waiting? Do they treat you kindly or coldly?" "Well," Mai sneers, "maybe if you're lucky, you'll get to find out firsthand." "You know what," says Connor. "You think too much. Well, somebody has to make up for the collective lack of brain power down here." Now Connor finally begins to get it. Even though Hayden has put the candle down, all this talk of unwinding is just like passing his hand across the flame. He likes to linger at the edge of dangerous places, dangerous thoughts. Connor thinks about his own favorite edge being behind the freeway road sign. In a way, they're both alike. "Fine," Connor tells him. "Think about stuff until your head explodes, but the only thing I want to think about is surviving to 18. I find your shallowness both refreshing and disappointing at the same time. Do you think that means I need therapy?" "No, I think your parents deciding to unwind you just to spite each other means you need therapy." "Good point. You have a lot of insight for a Morlock." Then Hayden gets quiet for a moment, with a smirk on his face fades. "If I actually get unwound, I think it will bring my parents back together." Connor doesn't have the heart to burst his fantasy, but Maya does. "Nah, if you get unwound, they'll just blame each other for it and hate each other even more." "Maybe," says Hayden. "Or maybe they'll finally see the light and it'll be Humphrey Dumphy all over again." "Who?" says Maya. They both turn toward her. Hayden cracks a wide smile. "You've never heard of Humphrey Dumphy?" Maya looks around suspiciously. "Should I have?" That smile never leaves Hayden's face. "Maya, I'm truly amazed you don't know this. It's your kind of story." He reaches for the candle and pushes it out so that it sits between the three of them. "It's not a campfire," he says, "but it will have to do." Hayden looks into the flame for a moment, then slowly, eerily turns his eyes towards Maya. "Years ago there was this kid. His name wasn't really Humphrey. It was probably Hal or Harry or something like that. But Humphrey kind of fits considering anyways. One day his parents signed the order to have him unwound." "Why?" asked Maya. "Why do any parents sign the order? They just did, and the juvie cops came for him bright and early one morning. They snatched him. Ship him off, and it's over for him. He's unwound without a stitch." "So that's it?" asked Mai. "No, because there is a hitch," says Connor, picking up where Hayden left off. "See, the Dunphys, they're not what you call stable people. They were a little bit nuts to begin with, but after their kid is unwound, they lose it completely. Now Mai's tough girl exterior is all but gone. She truly is like a little kid listening wide-eyed to a campfire story." "What did they do?" "They decided they didn't want Humphrey unwound after all." Wait a second," says Mai. "You said they already unwound him." His eyes look maniacal in the candlelight. "They did." Mai shudders. "Here's the thing," says Hayden. "Like I said, everything about Harvest Camp is secret, even the records of who receives what once the unwinding is done." "Yeah, so?" "So the Dumphys found the records. The father, I think, worked for the government, so he was able to hack into the parts of the department." "The what?" Hayden's eyes. "The National Unwind Database." "Oh." "And he gets a printout of every single person who received a piece of Humphrey." So the Dumfries go traveling around the world to find them so they can kill them, take back the parts bit by bit to make Humphrey whole. No way. That's why people call him Humphreys, Connor adds, because all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humphrey together again. The thought hangs heavy in the air until Hayden, leaning forward over the candle, suddenly throws his hands out towards Mai and shouts, "Boo!" They all flinch in spite of themselves, Mai most of all. Connor has to laugh. "Did you see that? She practically jumped out of her skin." "Better not do that," Mai says Hayden. "Jump out of your skin and they'll give it to someone else before you can get it back. You can both just take a flying leap." Mai tries to punch Hayden, but he easily evades her. That's when Roland appears from behind his bookshelves. "What's going on here?" "Nothing," says Hayden, "just telling ghost stories." Roland looks at the four of them, clearly irritated and distrustful of any situation not involving him. "Yeah, well, get to bed, it's late." Roland lumbers back to his corner, but Connor's sure he's monitoring the conversation now, probably paranoid that they were plotting against him. "The Humphrey Dumpy thing," says Mai, "is just a story, right?" Connor keeps his opinion to himself, but Hayden says, "I knew a kid who used to tell people he had Humphrey's liver. Then one day he disappeared and never was seen again. People said he just got unwound, but then again, maybe then the Dumfries got him." Then Hayden blows out the candle, leaving them in darkness. Oh, Connor and Risa's third date there. Sonia calls each of them upstairs, but one at a time, in the order they've arrived. First, the thieving ox, she says, pointing down the stairs at Roland. Apparently she knows about the stolen MP3 player. "What do you suppose the dragon lady wants?" Hayden asks, after the trap doors close. "To drink your blood," says Mai. "Beat you with your cane for a while, stuff like that." "I wish you'd stop calling her the dragon lady," Risa says. "She's saving your ass. The least you could do is show some respect." She turns towards Connor. "You want to take Dee Dee? My arms are getting tired." Connor takes the baby, cradling it a bit more skillfully than he had before. Mai looks at him with mild interest. He wonders if Hayden told her that they're not really the baby's parents. Roland comes back from his appointment with Sonia half an hour later and says nothing about it. Neither does Mai when she comes back. Hayden takes the longest, and when she returns, he's closed-mouthed too, which is strange for him. It's unsettling. Connor goes next. It's night outside. When he goes upstairs, he has no idea what time of night. Sonia sits with him in her little back room, putting him in an uncomfortable chair that wobbles whenever he moves. "You'll be leaving here tomorrow," she tells him. "Going where?" She ignores his question and reaches into the drawer of an old roll-top desk. "I'm hoping you're at least semi-illiterate." "Why? What do you want me to read?" "You don't have to read anything." Then she pulls out several sheets of blank paper. "I want you to write." "What, my last will and testament? Is that it?" "A will implies you have something to pass on, which you don't. What I want you to do is write a letter." She hands him a paper and pen with an envelope. "Write a letter to someone you love. Make it as long as you want, or as short as you want. I don't care. But fill it with everything you wish you could say but never had the chance. Do you understand?" "But what if I don't love anybody?" She purses her lips and shakes her head slowly. "You unwise all the same. You think just because no one loves you, then you can't love anymore. All right, then. If there's no one you love, then pick someone who needs to hear what you have to say. Say everything that's in your heart. Don't hold back. And when you're done, put it in the envelope and seal it. I'm not going to read it, so don't worry about that." "What's the point? Are you going to mail it?" "Just do it and stop asking questions." Then she takes a little ceramic dinner bell and places it on the roll-top desk next to the pen and paper. "Take all the time you need, and when you're done, ring the bell." Then she leaves him alone. It's an odd request, and Connor actually finds himself a bit frightened by it. There are places inside he simply doesn't want to go. He thinks he might write to Ariana. That would be easiest. He cared about her. She was closer to him than any other girl had ever been. Every girl except Risa, but then Risa doesn't really count. What he and Risa have isn't a relationship, it's just two people clinging to the same ledge hoping not to fall. After about 3 lines of his letter, Connor crumples the page. Writing to Ariana feels pointless. No matter how much he resisted, he knows who he needs to address this letter to. He presses pen to a fresh page and writes, "Dear Mom and Dad." It's 5 minutes before he can come up with another line, but once he does, the words start flowing and in strange directions too. At first it's angry, as he knew it would be. "How could you? Why did you? What kind of people do this to their kid? Yet by the third page it mellows. It becomes about all the good things that happened in their lives together. At first he does it to hurt them, and then to remind them exactly what they've thrown away, because they signed the order to unwind him. But when it becomes all about remembering, or more to the point, getting them to remember, so that when he's gone, if he's gone, there would be a record of all the things he felt they were worth keeping alive. And he knew the letter would end. I hate you for what you've done, and I'll never forgive you. But he finally reaches the 10th page. He finds himself writing, I love you, your one-time son, Connor. Even before he signs his name, he feels tears welling up inside. They don't seem to come from his eyes, but from deep inside his gut. It's a heavy, so powerful it hurts his stomach and his lungs. His eyes flood, and the pain inside is so great. He's certain it will kill him right now. But he doesn't die, and in time the storm inside him passes, leaving him weak in every joint and muscle of his body. He feels like he needs Sonia's cane just to walk again. His tears have soaked into the pages, warping little grates into the paper but not smudging the ink. He folds the pages and slips into the envelope, and then stills and addresses it. He takes a few more minutes to make sure the storm won't come back. He then rings the bell. Sonia steps in moments later. She must have been waiting all this time just to go on the other side of that curtain. Connor knows she must have heard him bawling, but she doesn't say a thing. She looks at his letter, hefts it in her hand to feel its weight, and raises her eyebrows impressed. Had a lot to say, did you? Connor only shrugs. She puts the envelope face down on the table again. Now I want you to put a date on the back. Write down the date of your 18th birthday. Connor doesn't question her anymore. He does as she asks. When he's done, she takes the envelope from him. I'm going to hold this letter for you, she tells him. If you survive to 18, you must promise you'll come back here to get it. Will you make that promise? Connor nods, I promise. She shakes the letter at him to help make her point. I will keep this until a year after your 18th birthday. If you don't come back, I'll assume you didn't make it, that you were unwound, and in that case, I'll send the letter myself. She then hands the letter back to him, stands, and goes over to the old trunk that had covered the trapdoor. She opens the latch, and although it might be heavy opens the lid to reveal envelopes. Hundreds of them filling the trunk almost to the top. Leave it here, she says. It will be safe. If I die before you come back, Hannah has promised to take care of the trunk. Connor thinks of all the kids Sonia must have helped to have this many letters in her trunk, and he feels quite a wave of emotion taking over his gut. It doesn't quite bring him to tears, but it makes him feel soft inside. Soft enough to say, you've done something wonderful here. Sonia waves her hand, swatting the thought away. You think this makes me a saint? Let me tell you, I've had a considerably long life. I've done some pretty awful things, too. Well, I don't care. No matter how many times you smack me with that cane, I think you're decent. Maybe not. One thing you learn when you've lived as long as I have, people aren't all good and people aren't all bad. We move in and out of dark and light in our lives. Right now, I'm pleased to be in that light. On his way downstairs, she makes sure to smack him on the butt with her cane hard enough to sting, but only makes him laugh. He doesn't tell Risa what's in for her. Somehow telling her would be stealing something from her. Let this be between her, Sonia, pen, and the page, as it had been for him. She leaves the baby with him as she goes up to face the old woman. It's asleep. And right now, in this place and at this moment, there's something so comforting about holding it in his arms. He's thankful he saved it. He thinks that if he'd still had a form, this would have been a baby sleeping in his arms. 20. Risa. The next time Sonia opens the trapdoor, Risa knows things are changing again. The time has come to leave the safety of Sonia's basement. Risa is the first in line when Sonia comes to come up. Roland would have been, but Connor threw an arm out like a turnstile to let Risa get to the stairs first. With the sleeping baby crooked in her right arm and her left hand on the rusty steel banister, Risa climbs the jagged stone steps. Risa assumes she'll be climbing into daylight, but it's night. The lights are out in the shop. Just a few night lights are on, carefully positioned so the kids can avoid the minefield of random antiques around them. Sonia leads them to a back door that opens into an alley. There's a truck waiting for them there. It's a small delivery truck. On its side is a picture of an ice cream cone. Sonia hadn't lied. It is the ice cream man. The driver stands beside the open back door of the truck. He's a scruffy guy who looks like he's more likely be delivering illegal drugs than kids. Roland, Hayden, and Mai head for the truck, but Sonia stops Riza and Connor. Not yet, you two. Then Riza notices a figure standing in the shadows. Riza's neck hairs begin to bristle defensively. When the figure steps forward, she realizes who it is. It's Hannah, the teacher who saved them at the high school. Honey, the baby can't go where you're going, Hannah says. Reflexively, Riza holds the baby closer to her. She doesn't even know why. All she wants to do, since getting stuck with the thing, is get rid of it. It's all right, says Hannah. I've talked it over with my husband, and we're just say we're storked. It will be fine. Risa looks in Hannah's eyes. She can't see all that well in the dim light, but she knows the woman means what she says. Connor, however, steps between them. Do you want this baby? She's willing to take it, says Risa. That's enough. But does she want it? Did you want it? They seem to give Connor a pause for thought. Risa knows he didn't want it, but he'd be willing to take it when the alternative was a miserable life with a miserable family, just as Hannah is willing to save it from an uncertain future right now. Finally, Connor says it's not an it, it's a she. Then he heads off towards the truck. We'll give her a good home, Hannah says. She takes a step closer and Rita transfers the baby to her. The moment the baby's out of her arms, Rita feels a tremendous sense of relief, but an indefinable sense of emptiness. It's a feeling not quite intense enough to leave her in tears, but strong enough to leave her with the phantom sort of aching. The type of thing an amputee must feel after losing a limb. That is, before a new one is grafted on. You take care now, says Sonia, giving Riza an awkward hug. It's a long journey, but I know you can make it. Journey to where? Sonia doesn't answer. Hey, says the driver, I don't got all night. Riza says goodbye to Sonia, nods to Hannah, and turns to join Connor, who's waiting for her at the back of the truck. As Riza leaves, the baby starts to cry, but she doesn't look back. She's surprised to find about a dozen other kids in the truck, all distrustful and scared. Roland's still the biggest, and he solidifies his position by making another kid move, even though there's plenty of other places to sit. The delivery truck is a hard, cold metal box. It once had a refrigeration unit to keep the ice cream cold, but that's gone with the ice cream. Still, it's freezing in there, and it smells of spoiled dairy. The driver closes and locks the back door, stealing out the sound of the baby, who Riza can still hear crying. Even though the door is closed, she thinks she can still hear it, although it's probably just her imagination. The ice cream truck bounces along the uneven streets. The way the truck sways, their backs are constantly smacked against the wall behind them. Lisa closes her eyes. It makes her furious that she actually misses the baby. It thrusts upon her in the worst possible moment of her life. Why should she have any regret about getting rid of it? She thinks about the days that Heartland wore when unwanted babies could just be unwanted pregnancies quickly made to go away. Does the woman who made that other choice feel that same way she felt now, relieved and freed from an unwelcome and unfair responsibility, yet vaguely regretful? In her days in the stay-at-home when she was assigned to take care of infants, she would often ponder such things. The infant wing had been massive and overflowing with identical cribs, each containing a baby that nobody wanted. Words of the state could barely feed them, much less nurture them. You can't change laws without first changing humans' nature. One of the nurses often said she looked out over the crowd of crying infants. Her name was Greta. Whenever she said something like that, there was always another nurse within earshot who was far more accepting of the system and would counter with, "You can't change human nature without first changing the law." Nurse Greta wouldn't argue. She'd just grunt and walk away, which was worse. Riza also often wondered to have tens of thousands of babies that no one wanted, or to silently make them go away before they were even born. On different days, Risa had different answers. Nurse Greta was old enough to remember the days before the war, but she rarely spoke of them. All of her attention was given to her job, which was a formidable one, since there was only one nurse for every 50 babies. In a place like this, you have to have a practice triage, she told Risa, referring to how in an emergency a nurse had to choose which patients would get medical attention. Love the ones you can, Nurse Greta told her. Pray for the rest. Risa took the advice to heart and selected a handful of favorites to give extra attention. They were the ones Risa named herself instead of letting the randomizing computer name them. Risa liked to think she had been named by a human being instead by a computer. After all, her name wasn't all that common. It was short for Sonrisa, A Hispanic kid once told her. That's Spanish for smile. Risa didn't know if she had any Hispanic blood in her, but she liked to think she did. It connected her to her name. What are you thinking about? Connor asked, cheering her out of her thoughts and bringing her back to an uneasy reality around them. None of your business. Connor doesn't look at her. He seems to be focusing on a big rust spot on the wall, thinking, "You okay about the baby?" he asks. Of course. Her tone is intentionally indignant, as if the question itself offended her. Hannah will give her a good home, Connor says. Better than us, that's for sure. And better than that beady-eyed cow who got storked. He hesitates for a moment, then says, taking that baby was a massive screw-up, I know, but it ended up okay for us, right? And it definitely ended better for the baby. Don't screw up like that again, is all Risa says. Roland's sitting towards the driver and asks, where are we going? You're asking the wrong guy, the driver answers. They give me an address, I go there. I look the other way and I get paid. That's how it works, says another kid who had already been in the truck when it arrived at Sona's. We get shuffled around every safe house for a few days, then another, and then another. Each one is a little bit closer to where we're going. You going to tell us where that is? Asked Roland. The kid looks around, hoping someone else might have an answer for him, but no one comes to his aid. So he says, well, it's only what I hear, but they say we end up in a place called the graveyard. No response from kids, just rattling of the truck. The graveyard, the thought of it makes Riza even colder. Even though she's curled up, knees to chest, arms wrapped around like a straitjacket, she's still freezing. Connor must hear the chattering of her teeth because he puts his arms around her. I'm cold too, he says, body heat, right? And although she wants to argue, she finds herself leaning toward him. Transit, Part 3. 2003. Ukrainian Maternity Hospital, number 6. The BBC has spoken to mothers from the city of Kharkiv who say they gave birth to healthy babies only to have them taken by maternity staff. In 2003, the authorities agreed to exhume around 30 bodies from a cemetery used by Maternity Hospital number 6. One campaigner was allowed into the autopsy to gather video evidence. She's given that footage to the BBC and the Council of Europe. In its report, the Council describes a general culture of trafficking of children snatched at birth and a wall of silence from hospital staff upward over the fate. The picture shows organs, including brains, have been stripped and some bodies dismembered. A senior British forensic pathologist says he is very concerned to see bodies in pieces as that is not standard post-mortem practice. It could possibly be a result of harvesting stem cells from bone marrow. Hospital number 6 denies the allegations. Story by Matthew Hill, BBC Health correspondent from BBC News at bbc.com. What? Number 21, Love. Ain't no one gonna tell you what's in your heart, he tells Lev. You gotta find that out for yourself. Lev and his new travel companion walk alongside the train tracks, surrounded by thick, brushy terrain. You got it in your heart to run from unwinding. Ain't no one can tell you that it's the wrong thing to do, even if it's against the law. The good Lord wouldn't have put it in your heart if it wasn't right. You listen and fry, 'cause this here is wisdom. Wisdom you can take to the grave, then dig it up again when you need some solace. Solace, that means comfort. I know what solace means, says Lev, peeved by the mention of the good Lord, who hasn't done much for Lev lately, except confuse things. The kid is 15 and his name is Cyrus Finch. Although he doesn't go by that name. No one calls me Cyrus, had told Lev shortly after they met. I go by Sci-Fi. And since Sci-Fi is partial to nicknames, he calls Lev Fry, short for small fry. Since it has the same number of letters as Lev, he says it's appropriate. Lev doesn't want to burst his bubble by pointing out that his full name is Levi. Sci-Fi enjoys hearing himself talk. I make my own roads in life, he tells Lev. That's how come we're traveling the rails instead of some dumb old country road. Sci-Fi is Umber. They used to call us black. Can you imagine? Then there was this artist dude, mixed race himself, a little bit like this and a little bit of that. He got famous, though, for painting people of African ancestry of the Deep South. The color he used most was umber. People like that a whole lot better, so it stuck. But you didn't know where that word came from, did you, Fry? Following right along, they started calling so-called white people sienna after paint color. Better words don't have no value judgment to them. Of course, it's not like racism is gone completely, but as my dad liked to say, the veneer of civilization got itself a second coat. You like that, Fry? The veneer of civilization? He slowly sweeps his hand into the air as he says it, like he's feeling the fine finish of a table. My dad are always saying stuff like that. Sci-fi, a runaway, although he claims not to be. I ain't no runaway, I'm a run too, he told Lev when they first met, although he won't tell Lev where he's running to. When Lev asked Sci-Fi, shook his head and said, information shall be given on a need-to-know basis. Well, he can keep a secret because Lev doesn't care where he's going. The simple fact that he's got a destination is sure enough for Lev. It's more than Lev has. Destination implies the future. If this umber-skinned boy can lend Lev that much, it's worth it to travel with him. They had met at a mall. Hunger had driven Lev there. He had hidden in a dark, lonely place for almost 2 days after he lost Connor and Risa. With no experience of being a street rat, he went hungry, but eventually hunger turns anyone into a master of survival. The mall was a mecca for a newborn street rat. The food court was amazingly wasteful people. The trick, Lev discovered, was to find people who brought more food than they could possibly eat and then wait until they're done. About half the time, they just left it at the table. Those were the ones Lev went after because he might have been hungry enough to eat table scraps, but he's still too proud to rifle through the trash. While Lev was finishing off some cheerleader's pizza, he heard a voice in his ear. You ain't gotta be eating other folks' garbage, fool. Lev froze, certain it was a security guard, ready to haul him away, but it was this tall umber kid with a funny grin wearing attitude like it was a cologne. Let me show you how it was done. Then he went to a pretty girl who was working at the Wicked Walk Chinese food concession, flirted with her for a few minutes, then left with nothing. No food, no drink, nothing. I think I'll stick to leftovers, Lev had told him. Patience, my man. See, it's getting on toward closing time. All these places by law gotta get rid of the food they made today. They can't keep it and reuse it tomorrow. So where do you think the good food goes? I'll tell you where it goes. It goes home with the last shift. But the people who work these places ain't gonna eat that stuff on account of they're sick to death of it. See that girl I was talking to? She likes me. I told her I work at Shirt Bonanza downstairs and could get her some overstock maybe. Do you work there? No, are you even listening to me? So anywho, right before closing, I'm gonna get myself over to Wicked Walk again. I'll give her a smile and I'll be all like, hey, what you gonna do with all that leftover food? And she'll be all like, what you got in mind? And 5 minutes later, I'm walking away in orange chicken heaven with food enough to feed an army. And sure enough, it happened exactly like he said it would. Lev was amazed. Stick with me, Sci-Fi had said, putting his fists in the air. And as God is my witness, you'll never go hungry again. Then he added, that's from Gone with the Wind. I know, said Lev, which in fact he didn't. Lev had agreed to go with him because he knew the two filled a need in each other. Sci-Fi was like a preacher with no flock. He couldn't exist without an audience, and Lev needed someone who could fill his head with ideas to replace the lifetime of ideas that had been taken from him. A day later, Lev's shoes were worn and his muscles were sore. The memory of Risa and Connor is still a fresh wound, and it doesn't want to heal. Chances are they were caught. Chances are they've been unwound. All because of him. Does that make him an accomplice to murder? How could it, when unwinds aren't really dead? He doesn't know whose voice is in his head anymore. His father's? Pastor Dan's? It just makes him angry. He'd rather hear Sci-Fi's voice outside of his head than whatever voices were inside. The terrain around them hasn't changed since they left town. High shrubs and a smattering of trees. Some of the growth is evergreen, some of it's yellow, turning brown. Weeds grow up with the train tracks, but not too tall. Any weed dumb enough to grow tall ain't got no chance. It gets decapitated by the next train that comes through. Decapitated, that means head cut off. I know what decapitated means, and you could stop talking that way. All the double negatives and stuff. Sci-fi stopped right there in the middle of the railroad tracks and stares at Lev like he's trying to melt him with his eyes. You got a problem with the way I talk? You got a problem with old world umber patos? I do when it's fake. What you talking about, fool? It's obvious. I bet people never even said things like fool except on dumb pre-war TV shows and stuff. You're speaking wrong on purpose. Wrong? What makes it wrong? It's classic, just like those TV shows. I ain't appreciating you disrespecting my patos. Patos means, I know what it means. Lev says, even though he isn't entirely sure. I ain't stupid. Sci-fi puts up an accusing finger like a lawyer. Aha, you said ain't. Now who's talking wrong? That doesn't count. I said it because it's all I hear from you. After a while, I can't help but sound like you. At that, Sci-Fi grins. Yeah, he says, ain't that the truth? Old world umber is contagious. It's dominant. And talking the talk don't make a person dumb. I'll have you know, I got the highest reading and writing score in my school, Fry. But I gotta respect my ancestors and all they went through so I could be here. Sure, I can talk like you, but I choose not to. It's like art, you know. Picasso had to prove to the world he can paint the right way before he goes putting both eyes on one side of a face and nose is sticking out, kneecaps and stuff. See, if you paint wrong because that's the best you can do, you're just a chump. But you do it because you want to, then you're an artist. He smiles at Lev. That's a bit of sci-fi wisdom right there, Fry. You can take that to the grave and dig it up when you need it. But Sci-Fi turns and spits out a piece of gum that hits a train rail and sticks there. Then he shoves another piece in his mouth. Anyway, my dad's got no problems with it, and they're Lily Sienna like you. They, Sci said, before, but Lev had figured it was more of old Umber slang. Yeah, says Sci-Fi with a shrug. I got two, ain't no thing. Lev tries his best to precede this. Of course, he's heard of male parenting, or yin families as they're called, but in the sheltered structure of his life, such things always belong to an alternate universe. Sci-Fi, however, doesn't even catch Levi's surprise. He's still on his brag jag. Yeah, I got myself an IQ of 155. Did you know that, Fry? Of course not. How would you know? Then he hesitates. It went down a few points, though, an account that an accident I was on my bike and got hit with some damn fool in a Mercedes. He points to a scar on the side of his head. What a mess. Splattered, you know. I was nearly roadkill. It turned my right temporal lobe into jello. He shivers as he thinks about it, then shrugs. But brain damage ain't a problem like it used to be. They just replaced the brain tissue and you're good as new. My dad's even paid off the surgeon so I get an entire temporal lobe from an unwind, no offense, rather than get a bunch of brain bits like people who are supposed to get. Lev knows about that. His sister Kara had epilepsy, so they replaced a small part of her brain with 100 teeny brain bits. It took care of the problem, and she didn't seem any worse for it. It never occurred to Lev that those teeny pieces of brain tissue might have come from. See, brain bits work out okay, and they don't work great. Sci-Fi explains, it's like putting a spackle over a hole in a wall. No matter how well you do it, that wall ain't never gonna be as good. So my dad's made sure I got an entire temporal lobe from a single donor. But that kid wasn't as smart as me. He wasn't no dummy, but he didn't have the 155. The last brain scan put me at 130. That's in the top 5% of the population and still considered genius, just not with a capital G. But what's your IQ? He asked Lev. Are you dim bulb or high wattage? Lev sighs. I don't know. My parents don't believe in intelligence scans. It's kind of a religious thing. Everyone's equal in God's eyes and all that. Oh, you come from one of those families, Sci-Fi takes a good look at him. So if they all high and mighty, why are they unwinding you? Although Levs didn't want to get into it, he figures Sci-Fi is the only friend he's got. Might as well tell him the truth. I'm a tith. Sci-Fi looks at him with eyes all wide, like Lev just told him he was God himself. Damn, so you all holy and stuff. Not anymore. Sci-Fi nods and purses his lips, saying nothing for a while. They walk along the tracks. The railroad ties change from wood to stone, and the gravel on the side of the tracks now seem better maintained. We just crossed the state line, Sci-Fi says. Lev wouldn't ask him which state they crossed into, but he doesn't want to sound stupid. Any spot where multiple tracks merge or diverge, there's a light two-story shack standing there like its displaced lighthouse. A railroad switch house, there's plenty of them along with the stretch of the line, and these are the places Lev and Sci-Fi find shelter each night. Aren't you afraid someone in the railroad will find us here? Lev asks if they approach one of the sorry-looking structures. Nah, they ain't used anymore. The whole system's automated, but it's been that way for years. But it costs too much to tear all those switch houses down. Guess they'll figure nature will eventually tear them down for free. The switch house is padlocked, but a padlock is only as strong as the door it's on. And this door has been routed by termites. A single kick rips the padlock hasp from the wood, and the door flies inward to a shower of dust and dead spiders. Upstairs is an 8x8 room window on all four sides is freezing. Sci-Fi has an expensive-looking winter coat that keeps him warm at night. Lev only has a puffy, fiber-filled jacket he had stole from a chair at the mall the other day. Sci-Fi had turned his nose up when he saw Lev take that jacket just before they left the mall. Stealing's for lowlives, Sci had said. If you got class, you don't steal what you need. You get other people to give it to you of their own free will. Just like I did back at the Chinese place. It's all about being smart and being smooth, you'll learn. Lev's stolen jacket is white and he hates it. All his life he's worn white, a pristine absence of color that defined him. But now there's no comfort in wearing it. They eat well that night, thanks to Lev, who finally had his own survivalist brainstorm. It involved small animals killed by passing trains.